Hey guys, Brett Weiss here, checking in from Game on Expo with
John Riggs. How are you feeling?
You know, I've actually started a couple of my videos with how you feeling, attributing you, of course.
I appreciate that.
It's a great intro.
You know, it's a phrase I've been saying since the early 90s when I worked at Rite Aid.
Oh, okay.
It was, my boss said it one time when a customer was walking in. I was like, because I used to say like, hey, how's it going, or whatever.
Right.
And then he was just like, how are you feeling? I was like, oh, I kind of like that. I'm going to start saying that as customers walk in. And it stuck 25 years later.
Well, with your sort of radio sing-songy voice, it works perfectly.
No, they're perfect. I love it.
Yeah, so we're going to ask John his first memory of a video game at all, how that led into being a hobby, and then a YouTube career. So let's get to it. All right, John, let's go to the Wayback Machine.
Okay, God.
And yeah,
for us, it's way back.
Boy, it is a long time ago. One thing I like about doing shows with like you and Hancock and Jason, MJR, is that you guys aren't as old as I am, but you're adjacent.
We're in the vicinity.
Right. Some of your, at least there's some gray hairs going, and you remember Atari.
Oh yeah. Well, what hair I have left anyway? I don't know.
Right. I'm starting to thin out a little bit, so I'm looking into road game.
There we go.
All right. So look.
Yeah.
Just what was the first video game on your radar at all in any sense?
My goodness. My first memory of playing a video game was Donkey Kong in the arcade.
Great start.
And I remember like Jolly Joker, Yakima Mall, and it was the second from the left in the back of the room. And for some reason, I remember, like my memory is walking up to it, kind of saying to myself, "Oh, there's Donkey Kong. I'm gonna go play Donkey Kong."
Had you heard of it before then?
I had to have heard of it because I remember calling it Donkey Kong because my brother was there too. He's like, I'm going to play Donkey Kong.
And how old would you have been?
I had to have been maybe 5 years old.
And what year was this?
This would have been 1982.
Okay, so the year after it came out.
So by that time, I know I've played it before. Like when I walked, like that's just my memory.
Right.
And in my memory, it's like, oh, I've played that game before. I'm going to play it again. But that's my first memory of actually playing a game.
Yeah.
Was seeing Donkey Kong, recognizing it in the arcade, being, oh, there's that game I like. I'm going to play me some Donkey Kong.
Did it seem difficult?
You know, it was funny because during those days, I don't know how good I was or anything like that. I kept playing until I was done. I wasn't going for the high score or anything like that. I don't remember if it was difficult or not. I just remember playing it, having fun, and then I lasted as long as I did, and that was good enough for me.
Well, I distinctly remember Donkey Kong first showing up at the arcade in '81 when it came out.
Okay, oh yeah.
And my brother and I were just blown away by it because it was a cartoon. It was a storyline, like a classic fairy tale type storyline.
That's true, yeah.
And we really hadn't seen anything like that in video games before.
Right.
Maybe Pac-Man a little bit with a character and everything.
A couple cutscenes here and there, but yeah.
But as far as an animated story, mind-blowing.
Yeah, totally.
And I remember watching people go up to it, and they could not beat the first level at first because it was a brand new game. People didn't really know what was going on. You had the jumping mechanic was novel at the time.
Sure.
And so,
I never thought about that.
Yeah, but we were floored because growing up with this stuff and seeing it as it comes out, the perspective was just amazing because, after playing Space Invaders and Pac-Man and Asteroids and Defender and all these games, seeing something like Donkey Kong was just wow.
Yeah, I mean, an interactive cartoon for the time because before that, all we had to work off of was all the sci-fi and space. It's like, oh, Space Invaders, #1 game. Let's make as many Space Invaders clones as we can.
Yeah.
So. And
it was the games were just sort of like aloof a little bit, and Donkey Kong sort of got more personal with the characters and everything. Right. So this fed so you started playing other games around, and what sort of, how did it evolve into you playing other games? Tell me a timeline with your, more arcades and consoles and
well, we had for the longest time, even in 1982, it was all about the arcade experience. So we had our local Yakima Mall, and that had Jolly Joker. That was our main arcade. There's a couple of other arcades in town, but it was also during a time when every gas station, every grocery store, every pizza parlor, of course, would have a few games. And I lived about a block away from a place called Red Robin. I don't know how franchised it is now.
Yeah, the burger joint?
Yeah, it was a burger joint.
Yeah.
And but Yakima was one of the first. Yakima was the first franchised Red Robin outside of Seattle.
Oh, okay.
And but in the back room, they also had a little arcade, so I remember spending a lot of time there.
Yeah.
But we didn't get our Atari 2600 until I think it was later that year. It was right around when the pack-in was when Pac-Man, I think, was the pack-in along with Combat.
Right.
So but again, like big house. I'm the 6th of 7 children. We had an Atari 2600, but we also, had everyone else fighting over the one TV that we had, because in the early 80s,
most households had one television.
Having more than one TV would be like having more than one microwave.
Right.
Is what that is.
I'm going to get this on.
What's going on here? John Hancock is interrupting our interview here.
Oh, you did an interview?
Yeah, that's we're not just hanging out BSing.
I thought you were just talking.
That's okay. Yeah.
No, it's all good.
No, you're cool.
You never know what's going to happen,
right?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Photo bomb, video bomb, the world's
right.
first video bomb.
I know.
So anyway, continue, please.
Oh yeah, so we had the Atari, which I loved,
right?
Because I remember distinctly my dad going to the store because he was going to pick up the Atari 2600.
Nice. Yeah.
And my mom was telling me like, oh, and it has Pac-Man. You can play Pac-Man at home. And I was like, I remember thinking to myself like, do I have to put quarters into the Atari to play Pac-Man, or how is that going to work? I didn't realize I could just play.
That's a great like 6 or 7-year-old brain.
That was me.
Yeah.
It's just like because I wasn't as familiar because I just wasn't at the time.
Yeah.
But again, also fighting with all my 2 older brothers and my 2 sisters that were all around the same age.
Yeah.
We were all spaced out about 2 years apart.
Right.
We all played video games, but then we also had to share the controller and all that. And that's when I learned if I wake up at 4 a.m. before everyone else, then I can get my own exclusive Atari time for even a couple of hours before everyone else woke up and everything like that.
Boy, the struggle was real. I remember
it was, man.
I would go in to watch a television show, and my brother would start playing the piano, which was in the same room, in the living room, and my mom would let him because playing a piano was more constructive than watching a television show. So he could interrupt my TV. Even if I was watching a show that I really wanted to see, it didn't matter. If he started playing the piano, it's culturally, So the struggle was real. It was an interesting time. The early 80s, you had to live through it to really fully appreciate it. But we try to tell you guys, in my Tales from a Retro Gamer series, I try to, relive it for you guys and just tell you what it was like. And like John said, there were arcades everywhere. I went to a Dallas Mavericks game in the early 80s, and I'm walking around the concourse, suddenly there's an arcade every few feet, all around the concourse.
That's right.
Unheard of today.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in my local venue, we had the Yakima Valley Sun Dome, and there's still a couple of arcade machines there, like next to the vending machines.
Yeah.
We do have a couple of them, but anymore, like the arcade machines that you see, they're always going to be like the Cabela's Game Hunt, something a little bit more interactive.
Right.
So again, great to see, great to have, but man, it's not exactly the same. And sometimes you'll find arcade machines that you swear were Mandela effect. This is like, I remember playing this one game, but you don't remember what it was called because it didn't matter what it was called. You just, it's like, oh, there's that thing again.
Sure.
Oh my God, there was, you had to kind of keep your own little personal mental map to see where all the games were. It's like I could tell you at any given time, especially back then.
Yeah.
Like this gas station over here has these 2 games. This other gas, the 7-Eleven has these 3. You had to keep track to to find out what you're going to play and where you're going to play it next.
Absolutely, I would go from store, the 7-Eleven, the Walmart. As you walked in, where the shopping carts are, they had arcades.
Oh, nice. We didn't have a Walmart back then. But
I remember the arcade Walmart I went to had Asteroids, and I would spend hours in there. I mastered that game and would play it for hours. The Treasure City we had Gorf. I mean, this is important. You knew which game was where.
Oh, yeah.
And similarly with consoles, I know which cousin had an Atari, which cousin had an Odyssey 2, which friend had an Intellivision.
That's right.
Important stuff.
You had to keep track of these things because back then you couldn't rent video games.
Right.
Borrowing games from other people, I guess you could kind of do that. We did that a couple of times because my sister had a friend who also had an Atari, so you do the little collateral trade kind of thing. And
my friends and I would trade ColecoVision.
Oh, there you go. See, just something like that. But back then that's all we had to work with, and you didn't even know what game was coming out until it was already out. And you're like, oh, there's the game I recognize in the arcade, and it's the Atari version of it or something like that.
And what a lot of people don't realize, you could not collect video games cheaply because there was no previous market. These games were new. You might get lucky at a garage sale occasionally, but even then they were kind of marked up a little bit because this was a new technology. And like now, you can go back to get super cheap NES games, super cheap Atari 2600 games, the common stuff.
Right.
You can build a massive retro collection for cheap if you get the common stuff. Right. But in the early 80s, there was no way to build a retro gaming collection cheap. There just wasn't. No. And so you just knew where everything was. You played your friends' games. So how did your interest in video games over the years lead up to you having a YouTube channel and all this kind of stuff?
Oh, we're going to have to kind of skip ahead from the Atari to the NES. And then once the NES came out, that's like before, when Atari 2600 existed, we would share the controller. And if my dad was home, the TV was on whatever my dad was watching.
Sure.
That was his TVs, and
Yeah.
he was the breadwinner. So and
Right.
we respected that.
Absolutely.
But if he was gone, then we would either share. But it also wasn't just Atari. Back then, it was like we'd have our Atari, but we'd also play board games as a family.
Yeah.
We would watch TV shows as a family, things like that. But when the NES came out, and even when the NES first came out, we had one and a couple of games, and it was funny because the games we had were the Donkey Kong Junior combo cards,
Right.
Donkey Kong Classics.
Absolutely.
We
Yeah,
had-
with the orange box.
Yeah, we had Burger Time.
Yeah.
So it was all these classic arcade games.
Yeah,
anyway,
yeah,
just
yeah.
now on Nintendo. So I was like, but I have 50 Atari games versus the 2 Nintendo games
Right.
I had. So about the first year we had an NES, I was still mostly playing Atari.
Yeah, yeah.
It wasn't until then more and more games came out, and then you'd start to see games, maybe at a yard sale or used or something like that.
Yeah.
We did have a local pawn shop that started carrying, people would sell their old NES games there, and I could
Yeah.
buy them for, whatever they were back then.
And you could also, once the NES came out, the previous system seemed uncool to kids.
That's right.
And so you could start retro gaming on the cheap, because you could start finding Atari and Coleco and
for
stuff
sure.
really cheap.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I inherited someone else's Atari collection because they're like, I got to do a Nintendo, so
Yeah.
I know you play Atari. Here's a bag full of 20 games. I was like, I'll
Right.
take them. Oh
Yeah.
my god, for sure, I'll take them.
Yeah.
Love that. But no, then from there with the NES, that's when the NES came out. That was like, okay, the video games is my true passion.
Yeah.
And then goes from there.
The NES created a whole cult. Now, the Atari 2600 was a cultural phenomenon.
Oh, absolutely.
But the NES cranked that up to a new level with, kids at playgrounds were suddenly talking about how to beat a boss or what tips and tricks there were.
You had to make friends just to find out where the red ring was in Zelda. I mean, you had to,
Right.
and that became the new focal point. And you would make friends because you hear them say Nintendo or hear them say, "Oh, wait a minute, okay, I found my frequency. I found my new best friend."
Right.
And then you build from there. I have friends today because we played Nintendo back in the 80s.
That is awesome.
But then from there, that's when, boy, we're gonna have to fast forward all the way to when it became to YouTube and all that too.
Yeah.
So Nintendo, Super Nintendo, all these.
So
things
you
came
stayed
out.
a gamer with each generation of
I
consoles?
did. I grew with it. I would always go back to the old stuff too, even when Super Nintendo and Genesis were red hot and more things were coming out. I noticed our video store would also still get the new NES games.
Yeah.
So I'd play the Super Nintendo game, and I was like, well, I wonder how it plays on the NES. And then I'd play the NES version, or
Right.
So I remember renting Little Samson. I remember renting Bonk's Adventure for the NES because I had Bonk's Adventure for the TurboGrafx 16. I also love TurboGrafx 16.
Nice.
But then from there, so that was, I'll play whatever I can from the video store and all that. I worked out a deal with my local video store because they'd be like, oh, this game's broken. It rattles because one of the plastic things fell off. But that's when I was like, well, I can clean, I can fix it for you.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, here's a stack of Nintendo games. Please fix these. So I remember the giant stack. It was like 10 games. I fixed 9 of them.
How did you know how to do this already?
I didn't. I just bullshit my
okay.
way through it. So, but I had the screwdriver to open them up and take the rattle out.
Right.
And usually when they this game's broken, it's because they just wanted to return it, whatever.
Yeah.
But when I took them back, they're like, oh, cool. So I became kind of the local guy who would take their games and fix them in trade for free rentals. So I had almost basically unlimited free rentals from this video store.
So that was sort of the
quite a while.
genesis of your videos about, what are your videos called where you fix a game to see if it
The
works?
open cart surgery.
Yeah, open cart surgery.
It all started way back in the early 90s.
That's so cool.
Where I'll just kind of do that a little bit. And just get Q-tips and rubbing alcohol just to clean them up a little bit. And that's
Right.
really, at the end of the day, that's all it is for the most part.
Yeah.
But then from there, that's when I was like, well, you'd see a game on the store shelf. I was like, I would never play that in a million years. It looks terrible. However, if it's free, what's it going to hurt to pop it in and check it out? So that's when I
Right.
started finding all these hidden gems, what we consider hidden gems today back then. But then as time progresses, I was like, well, I'm trying to play what I can. When the late 90s, early 2000s roll around, I'm starting to see less and less Nintendo stuff on shelves because they're not making any new Nintendo games.
Yeah.
So like driving to Seattle and just, because yes, emulation is a thing at this point, but I may never see these cartridges ever again. I don't know the future.
Right.
So that's when I started kind of buying like one of each of any game I didn't already have.
Yeah.
And just to see what all's out there, and then eventually you kind of get to a point where it's like, well, how many games are there? Maybe I can get one of everything. And then with emulation, that's when I started to discover the Japanese market. Because I was like, oh, I can play these games from Japan now that I've only heard about in like Game Fan magazine that would talk about imports sometimes.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, I heard about this one game that came out, or the sequel to the game that we never got here. And I started looking at those, and it wasn't until, and then I always did that, kept it in the back of my mind, and then there was a 10-year gap where I got a girlfriend, I got a full-time job, I got married, I had children.
Wow.
So that was that portion of life.
Start adulting.
It was fast forward, and I didn't really keep up with the newer stuff as much.
Yeah, as one does. I mean, life.
Or even collecting. I didn't.
Yeah.
As I'm collecting these games from the late '90s, there wasn't a value to them. I mean, there was kind of a value, but back then you could find Contra for $1.
Oh my gosh.
You could find like Little Samson for $5, but whatever it is.
Absolutely. Yeah. I got my Gunstar Heroes CIB for $2.99.
Oh my god.
Funko Land.
Brilliant. See, I love that.
Yeah.
So I just did that, but I didn't realize there was a market online until one of my friends, I had a coworker who was like, "Oh, you like these old video games?
Yeah.
I found this. Here's this website full of the top 10 rarest, most expensive, valuable NES games from Racket Boy or something like that." I'm looking at this list. I was like, I have half of these just sitting in my parents' basement because when I moved out, I just left my games there and everything. I better rescue these before it's too late. So,
well, in the '90s, people started realizing some of these games are rarer than others. And collector's guides started, the fanzines and all that.
Yeah.
Hey, we got a announcement from John Lester, the organizer of Game On Expo.
Yeah, little brief cameo from Gamester 81 there.
That's right.
Yeah. So as I'm discovering these, and then through emulation and all that, and then that's when I realized through Instagram, because I was like, oh, there's every time I'd post a picture on Instagram of anything. I'd be like, oh, I'm eating ice cream with my kids. I'm doing this. Here's this old Nintendo game I used to like. But every time I'd post an old video game, it got more interaction than any of the other stuff I'd post. I was like, there's still a community for people who play these old video games. I thought I was the only one, but I wasn't really using social media at the time for that.
Yeah.
So I started kind of building from there, and then looking into things, and then still having a fondness for I played all the US Nintendo games. Let's check out the Famicom games and all that.
Yeah.
And then I started realizing, wait a minute, there's video game conventions. I've always heard of stamp collection shows or sci-fi conventions like Comic Cons. I didn't realize there was one specifically for video games.
What was the first one you went to?
It was the Seattle Retro Gamers Expo.
Oh, nice.
In Seattle, Washington, of course.
What year?
This would have been 2014.
Okay.
Maybe.
Yeah.
When I started realizing this was a thing, and that's when I met John Hancock for the first time. It's when I met.
Another
Hello.
cameo.
Yeah. It's when I met. It's when I met Metal Jesus for the first time.
Nice.
It's when I met Kinsey for the first time. So, but at the time, I was just I was just going there. It's like, oh, this is a pretty cool thing, and that's again when I met Metal Jesus for the first time, and Reggie as well. Yeah, Radical Reggie. After talking about that and started editing video games and stuff like that. That's when I was talking to Metal Jesus about some you like shooters? Here are some great shooters for the Famicom that that people don't really know about. Yeah, and Jason admits that he's not, he didn't really grow up at the NES like a lot of us did. Yeah. So he's still discovering games too, and I'm talking about all these great Japanese games for the Famicom, the Super Famicom, and he was just like, "You sure know a lot about Japanese video games. You want to be on my channel sometime?" It's nice. Sure. Yeah. Him not knowing I have a radio background, and him not knowing I did morning radio for years, so I can kind of hopefully predict when someone's going to talk and when they're not going to talk, so I can jump in and everything. And I went to his place for the first time. We recorded a couple videos together. And he was like, "Wow, that was actually pretty easy. You want to do it again?" Nice. And then from there, we just kind of became friends. And then it leads us to things like this and hang out. And I didn't have a YouTube channel for myself at the time, really. I did have a YouTube channel, but it was more like me filming stuff that my kids and I were doing as a video sharing service to send to my parents. To see that kids grow up. Right.
And what year did your channel start?
It started
as far as when you really got serious about it.
Yeah. The channel's date is something like November of 2014, but I didn't start doing regular videos. I said, I can actually start doing, and it was Jason's idea. It's like, you can actually start, you can do your own channel too, Right. And I would just put something in there every once in a while. It's like, I made this project. You sort of find it on Etsy or whatever. Right. And that's when Jason was like, and that's when he kind of showed me with YouTube, they love consistency. So even if you do one video a week, so I started doing one video a week probably in 2016 or something like that too, and then just kind of blew up from there, and then just hanging out vicariously. It's all about riding coattails, I think, at this point.
Well, speaking of blowing up, your channel has absolutely killed it. Are you at 240,000 subscribers now?
Not 40, but just over 200,000.
Okay, so, you'll be there. You'll be there soon. I mean, it's really snowballed. So, congratulations on that.
It's fun, and it's the door that opens to allow me to come out to conventions like this here in Phoenix. To fly out from Washington State, or just to travel around and tour around. And at the end of the day, we're all still fans. Never mind our accomplishments. Never mind the books that we've written. We do it because we're fans and we want to contribute to the product. And make our own games and stuff like that too, and lets us come out and hang out and kind of chat with people. What we're doing right now, but with, with someone on the other side of the table, or at the hotel lobby sometimes late at night. And
yeah, the fun I have at these shows, the fun I have just hanging out with other gamers.
Right.
The people I've met, that sort of even eclipses the games themselves. Just going out for a drink or dinner and everything.
It's what brings us all together.
Yeah.
It's like that's the core focus of it. That's the reason we're all here, is we all have that shared common interest. But then you also find other common interests where it's like, oh, wait a minute, you like breakfast cereal too, or oh, wait a minute, you like James Bond movies or something. You find these other little common interests amongst other people too. A lot of crossover. I mean, there's pro wrestling over here, and I know one of the wrestlers over here, and one of the wrestlers over here is also a huge video game collector. So there's a lot of crossover with anime, Star Trek, whatever else.
Well, I remember Gary Kitchen at the Portland Retro Gaming Expo. The famous Atari programmer. For you guys that
love
don't
the
know.
Kitchens. Oh yeah.
Oh, great guys.
Yeah,
well, we discovered that way he had something in common. We collect vintage paperbacks with like Frazetta covers, with fantasy art and everything.
Oh, interesting.
And so
That's
we got
unique.
to talk. Yeah. So we both went to Powell's Books in Portland. Amazing store.
Yeah.
And we got to talking about that. We have a lot in common in other areas, just in video games. So yeah, it's fun. Video games are the excuse. We all get together and then we just have a blast doing it. Yeah.
It's a little reunion for a lot of us, and it gives us a reason to hang out and I don't know. It's just it's the central meeting point are these video game conventions, and especially here at Game On in Phoenix, where it's gorgeous weather outside, and there's always something to do, and it's downtown, so there's great food everywhere you look. So.
Yeah, and you can walk to a bunch of different places.
Oh, I love it. Oh yeah, I had a little street vendor fair right in front of our hotel last night, so it's like, oh, perfect. I'll grab a slice of cake, and I still have cookies from left.
Right.
That's gonna be my lunch later today, I think. So.
Yeah, well, Hancock and I last night, I got on a food truck, got a burrito as big as my face, and I've got the other half for lunch today, so it works out.
Yeah, it's a good place to find a burrito here in Arizona.
All right, guys, most of you that are, if you're subscribed to my channel, I have no doubt that you're also subscribed to Riggs here, but if you're not, I'm going to leave the link in the description, and anything else you want to say today before we wrap up?
No, this is a great time, and your channel's doing great too, and
I appreciate that.
Love the fact that we come out to conventions like this, and even if we're here or not, still keep supporting local video game conventions in your area. If your area, and I've told people this too, if your area or your town does not have a video game convention and you're mad about it, be the one that starts one.
Right.
So many great video game conventions today. Portland Retro Gaming Expo started as a church basement swap meet.
Grassroots effort.
Yeah. So start with build a Facebook page, build a little community, start having swap meets and all that, and you never know. And then be the one that makes it happen. And anyone can do it.
Well, the first San Diego Comic-Con had 300 people. I believe it was 1971.
Oh wow!
And now it's got like 200,000 or something.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I was there at the first SakuraCon, which is the anime convention in Seattle. I was at the very first one. Before it was called SakuraCon, it was called BakaCon. I think they realized no Japanese guests will come to our convention if it's called Stupid Convention. So let's change the name from BakaCon to SakuraCon.
Right.
And they had a little voting poll. It could have been called Amicon for rain, whatever.
Yeah.
But I was at the very first one of those, and I was at the Doubletree Inn in Tukwila, Washington, just south of Seattle. And I think first year's attendance was something like 212.
Yeah.
But I was there. I was one of them. And,
That's cool.
And now it just takes over the whole downtown area of Seattle. So
Nice.
you never know where it's going to happen. But even if it's just a small little one, this is a good show here. But I mean, I don't even love attending. You look at the videos, it's like, well, that looks like a pretty small convention. I kind of like the smaller, chill conventions.
Small ones
too.
are a lot of fun,
Yeah.
and I actually end
Give
up
you a chance to breathe.
Yeah, and sometimes I sell more stuff at small shows because, like, if you're one of like 3 guests and there's not as many vendors, people might be more
there you
inclined
go.
to buy books.
Either way, yeah.
Sometimes, but it's all good. I love them all. But yeah,
They're
small
all great.
shows have a cool vibe to them for sure.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Thanks so much for watching. Thank you for liking and subscribing. Be sure and sub to Mr. Riggs if you haven't.
I'll take it.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, John. I appreciate you being on my channel.
Always.
It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, good to see you, dude.
All right, guys. Talk to you later. Be sure and like and subscribe, and let me know in the comments. Are you a massive John Riggs fan? I'm sure you are.
You don't have to say anything.
All right, guys. We'll talk to you later. Have a good one.
Take care.